In episode 57 of Zoids Chaotic Century, Van and Raven have their final battle of the series. Liger versus Geno Breaker, a battle we'd been leading up to all throughout Guardian Force up until this point. However, in the heat of battle, everything was rudely interrupted by Hiltz, showing off his fancy new Death Stinger as if there wasn't already a cooler fight going on that we were watching. Nonetheless, the battle is over, and the next time we see Van and Raven together is when they're fighting together against Hiltz in the Death Saurer. But if we were fortunate enough to see the battle continue, hypothetically, who would have won? Was Van actually going to beat Raven this time around, or was Raven just going to stomp him like he has done every single time so far throughout Guardian Force? First, let's examine the fight itself real quick. To start with, this was never a 1v1. It was Raven versus Van, Irvine, and 10 gun snipers that were used to break the Geno Breaker shield. And I also say this definitely wasn't Raven's peak performance. He could have easily dodged and taken out those gun snipers in a second, but decided to just be stubborn and take the hit. Raven honestly just wasn't being very maneuverable at all. We know the Geno Breaker is capable of it, but really he was just kind of standing around. I'm probably going to have to chalk that up to animation and budget restraints though, because this fight in and of itself just wasn't scripted or animated very well at all for what was supposed to be our final rematch between rivals. Throughout the fight itself, nobody really makes any significant strides up until the very end, when Van and Raven decide to finally duke it out, and Van manages to get past the Geno Breaker's charged particle gun and cut off one of its X-Breakers. At this point, Raven comments that they're running out of power and time due to the amount of stress the Geno Breaker puts on Shadow, with both Van and Raven saying they want to finish the battle off with the next attack, before, of course, being interrupted by Hiltz. So what kind of state are they in at this point? We can't really gather much from the animation itself. As far as we can see, they don't have much scratches on either of them. They both look okay, with Van also just losing his attack boosters and the surprise overcharged shield, and conversely Raven losing one of his X-Breakers and Shadow running out of steam. Essentially, neither of them really have any surprises left to bring out. So who would win? Let's have a look at some of their other feats throughout the rest of the series to try and determine that. First off, we've got the exhausted Van versus Reece and the Genosaurer. Reece absolutely stomps Van at this point, but realistically, the Geno Breaker is still stronger than this Genosaurer. So in a warped way, a fresh Blade Liger and Van versus the Geno Breaker should be somewhat comparable to this fight. And if we can tell Van struggled with Reece, there's a good chance he might have struggled in the late game against the Geno Breaker, even without Shadow. Then we've got the next comparable feat against the Death Stinger. First, we see how Raven tries to take out Hiltz in his busted up Geno Breaker, and, well, he gets torn apart. But then later, we get to see Van fight Hiltz without Zeke, and he really puts Hiltz on the ropes, managing to tear one of its claws off, dodging a charged particle beam, and hold the Stinger back with just suppressive fire. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but this is the crazy powerful Death Stinger we're talking about here. The only problem with this feat and why it's harder to distinguish is that we're led to believe Van and the Blade Liger are getting an amp from the Zoids, and how that affects them is unknown. We are also told Hiltz should be getting this amp, but then when he does, we can visually see it. It's all really confusing. We don't know if they're both amped, or if they're both amped equally, or if, because Van has a stronger bond with the Liger, that obviously they can, work better and maybe get a stronger amp. We really don't know what's going on. All we can really deduce is that at this point, obviously the Blade Liger is like an extension of Van's body, and this might increase the amp he's getting from the Zoids because he's faring very well against the Death Stinger, which he hasn't shown to do as well previously. I mean, he messed up the busted Death Stinger with the help of Thomas and Irvine, but not a fully reformed Death Stinger like this instance. The last feat we've got before the end is Raven versus the 3 Genosaurers, which is a solid fight where Raven does get help from Shadow, but at this point it isn't implied he's getting an amp from the Zoid like Van was, especially if you take into consideration how much damage the Geno Breaker gets that never gets restored, whereas when you look back at the Death Stinger and Van, they both look like they haven't had a single scratch throughout the whole fight. To be honest, the whole Zoid amp is really inconsistent and makes it a bit harder to scale any of this, but anyway, we know Van's been seen to obviously defeat one Genosaurer in the past, pre-time skip. He couldn't necessarily beat a Genosaurer again post-time skip when Raven came back, so I don't think he'd be able to take out 3 in the same way Raven just did. So what did all of this really even tell us? Well, really, it just goes to show that these two are incredibly even. So let's hypothesize, who would have actually won this fight if the battle were to have continued? Personally, I'm going to go with Van. Firstly, it does make a bit more sense narratively because they would end up having to fight Hiltz regardless, and Van defeating Raven could have led to the same outcome of them teaming up, whereas the other way around might not have. Van probably would have died. I believe the Geno Breaker is a superior machine, and that Raven does tend to be a superior pilot, but it's clear he's arrogant going into this fight, especially when he lets himself get caught off guard by the gun snipers. He's already used most of his solid time fused with Shadow, and although he can fight pretty well without him, it does put him at a disadvantage, especially when Van does have Zeke. If you want, we could think of Raven and the Geno Breaker almost like a boss in Elden Ring. He's bloody strong and could easily take you out in one hit. But Van, or the player in this example, has been defeated by Raven numerous times before. So he's already learned a lot of what Raven and the Breaker are capable of, which means they do have the potential of overcoming him and taking the W. Would it be an easy win? No. Would it be a guaranteed win? Definitely not. And I'm only just leading over to the Van camp here, mainly because of narrative implications if it were to have continued. If I were to give it a percentage in this exact fighting scenario that we were put in, I put Van's win rate at about 60%. But a lot of that also does come down to Raven's mindset entering the fight and the fact that it wasn't a 1v1 to start with. If Raven just went out to an open field and versed 1v1 after the series ended, I believe Van would have been much harder pressed to win this battle and would probably put it around 75% in Raven's favor instead. But alas, it never happened anyway, and this unconcluded battle was the best we ever got to a final fight between these two rivals. But what do you think? Do you think Van would have come out with the win, or do you think Raven would have just stomped him in the final seconds even without Shadow to help him out? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you all enjoyed the video and have a fantastic day. See you next time.